The intellectual war among people of African heritage, make no mistake about it, there is an intellectual war raging among people of African heritage. On one side stand the Pan-Africanists and Afrocentrists, while on the other side are the free-range universal Africans. I was in Marabing here in South Africa, my motherland, strolling leisurely, my mind and body in a relaxed state. I cherish such moments, they are precious to me. As I walked for about a mile, I suddenly felt deeply connected to the natural world around me. It's in moments like these that fresh ideas flood the mind. Marabing, a place scientifically proven to be the cradle of humanity, reinforces the idea that all human beings trace their origins to Africa. As these thoughts swirled in my mind, I was struck by a profound realization. The law of nature calls for return. What goes around eventually comes back. The sun rises in the east and eventually returns there again. A child born to parents may rebel during adolescence, but more often than not, they find their way back. Think of the biblical parable of the prodigal son. If humanity originated in Africa, then it follows that there would be a return. And in many ways, this return is already happening. Whether from the west or the east, ideas are converging within Africa. The contemporary African identity is a distillation of Africa itself, blended with Western and Eastern influences. All major global players have embedded themselves within the continent. Africa is no longer just African, it is universal, embodying diverse cultures. Look at Africa today. Many countries bear the imprint of European, French, British, Spanish, Portuguese, and now a new force has arrived, the East. Some African nations are so deeply bonded with China that they are practically owned by it. Think of Zambia, where China's influence is so strong that it controls much of the country's national assets. The reality of fate and the failure of Pan-Africanism. What is the way forward? Reality is what it is. Fate is what it is. You cannot fight either. You must adapt. This is why Pan-Africanist aspirations have repeatedly failed. Their struggle against reality is futile and self-destructive. But what exactly is Pan-Africanism? It is an impractical ideology that seeks a pure and exclusive African unity where Africans, whether in the Caribbean, the Americas, Africa, Asia, or Europe, are bound solely by African identity and values. This vision is unrealistic. An African American may be black, but their perspective is vastly different from that of an African born and raised in Africa. There is no such thing as a pure African. Exposure to diverse influences, both Western and Eastern, shapes the African mind. Personally, I feel most at home in a room filled with people from different backgrounds, Chinese, white, Indian. When I find myself in a room where everyone is black, I feel uneasy, as though something is missing. Diversity enriches me. This tells me that I am not a Pan-Africanist. I am a Pan-humanist. And this is the reality for most Africans. They are not exclusively African, nor should they be. To limit oneself to a rigid identity is to stifle perspective and growth. For this reason, Pan-Africanism should be set aside. Yes, Africans share an invisible spiritual bond, but it should remain at that level in spoken, organic, not rigid or codified. Africans should be free to soar across the world like eagles, unrestricted by narrow ideological confines. There is no need for constant declarations of I am African. If you are African, that fact speaks for itself. You do not need to cocoon yourself within it. Yes, Africans should have a natural invisible bond, but that bind should remain at that invisible spiritual dimension. It should not be made rigid and codified. Away with Pan-Africanism. Most Africans just want a breath of fresh air to freely sweep across the blue sky like eagles without any limitation of such chest-beating nonsense. I am an African. That is bile. If you are African, you are African. There is no need to cocoon yourself into that and walk around. I am African. Perhaps over 75% of African Americans are of mixed parentage, black and white with some Indian blood. I see a critical mass of Africans rising above moribund archaic cultures and Pan-Africanism to become superpowered individuals because they are enriched and their perspective is wide beyond African identity. And that is something worth celebrating. Yet Pan-Africanism and African culture both are predisposed to cush and crash that. Pan-Africanism is the enemy of black people. It clips their wings and cannot fly freely. The blue sky. Stop it. So what? It's the whole matter. One thing, all humanity originating from Africa. The African mind must carry every humanity. So the African is uniquely universal. What a great idea. So now a new war is on amongst the adaptable universal Africans and Pan-Africanists. And the Pan-Africanists, through Marcus Garvey in early 20th century, failed when they South separation of African Americans from American, and the modern Pan-Africanism will fail. They already failed. No one takes them serious. A new philosophy is born for the contemporary universal African. We all know that for Africans to succeed, and they are a lot of them succeeding today, hundreds of millions, they must have resilience in a world that still have vestiges of racism against them. These Africans have extraordinary adaptability. Instead of succumbing, they rise. Instead of tit for tat, they forgive and become teachers of forgiveness and love. It is up to the individual African to have resourcefulness and ingenuity and weave his own meaning based on the environment he finds himself within. He must refuse to be enslaved by old African cultures. He must be existentialist in character and say existence precedes essence. In that way, he weaves his own meaning to succeed. No person in this modern world can succeed by yapping about old cultures these days, as cultures confront each other and are in an existential fight to die or live. Misguided Pan-Africanists see Africa culture as static and defend it at all times. They cling to what they call their past culture, unaware that that culture is supposed to change the moment it confronts different environments. A culture that is not dynamic does not enable the people to survive, but, in fact, may aid them to die out. All human beings belong to the same animal species. A species are animals that can reproduce with each other. Europeans can reproduce with Africans and Asians, but cannot reproduce with gorillas. For though gorillas look like human beings, they belong to a different species. I prefer to have friends from all over the world. White, Chinese, Japanese, East Indian, and so on. A variegated rose garden is more beautiful than a rose garden with only one color. Nature is wise in making people come in different colors and shapes. Today, Africans live in Arabia, the Americas, in Europe. Africans are also making their presence known in India, China, Japan, Australia. At the rate Africans are spreading, there is no doubt that in the next 500 years, Africans or a mixture of Africans and other people would form the majority of the populations of the world. If you like, Africans are in a period of gestation where they are synthesizing their indigenous cultures and the alien cultures imposed on them, and sooner or later would burst out with an adaptive culture, one that synthesized all the cultures they have been exposed to. I have made some efforts in that direction in my efforts to synthesize Occidental, Oriental, and African approaches to psychology, philosophy, and religion. Africa is the birthplace of all mankind. People migrated from Africa outwards to other regions of the world. In their new regions, they formulated civilizations that helped them adapt to their world. But now, civilization has come full circle to where mankind began. Africa. Africans understand the nature of love and forgiveness. Other groups merely talk about love and forgiveness, but do not know what they are talking about. It is Africans that have in fact been compelled to forgive other groups. Africans forgave the Arabs and Europeans that enslaved them. A group that has practiced forgiveness is in a position to teach mankind the nature of love. For on earth, true love is characterized by forgiveness. I have written on this subject elsewhere. If this world is to survive, we need forgiveness, and no other people are better equipped to teach them that than Africans. A people who have been subjected to incredible abuse and still are standing on their own feet. The history of abuse and magnificent adaptation to life despite that abuse has best prepared Africans to lead the New World Order, a new world civilization based on love. Our awareness of our union with one another. By the end of this century, world civilization would have passed into African hands, where it belongs until all mankind learns that it is one. I do not live in the past, I live in the present. We now need physical scientists, engineers, and medical doctors, not Afrocentrist Pan-Africanists. We need leaders in science and technology. Western history books tell us that the Italian Christopher Columbus, working for Spaniards, discovered America in 1492. However, books written by Black scholar John G. Jackson tells us that it is a bit more than that. Christopher Columbus had worked with the Portuguese sailing around the coast of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, present-day Western Cape province of South Africa. Apparently, he had picked up a whole lot of knowledge of the world from Africans. John G. Jackson goes on and tells us that Christopher Columbus picked up black South Africans who had in the past sailed to the Americas, and those guided him to America. In other words, black South Africans working with Christopher Columbus discovered America. Truth or lies? We know that the white man is capable of flying. In writing his history highs, capable of hiding the presence of black South Africans in Columbus ships. Not too long ago, Senegalese soldiers helped to defeat Hitler's Germany. But you wouldn't know that Africans fought in Europe to defeat the Third Reich by looking at the movies of the Second World War that white folks show us. They show us only white soldiers fighting to defeat the race-crazed Hitler. They leave out the African soldiers fighting to destroy Hitler and his Nazi sociopaths. One wouldn't put it past white folks to not tell lies. So, maybe Columbus was guided to America by black South Africans. I do not know, and it is not an issue with me. I would not dismiss John G. Jackson, the African-American scholar who says America was discovered by black South Africans. Asterisk. But here is the thing that makes me stop and listen to John G. Jackson. The fact that there are Olmec sculptures in Central America with Negroid features indicates the presence of black people in the Americas before Columbus. Don't tell me that white history is true and that black history is not. White European history is not that much better than African history. What is a lie? Isn't all history lies told to serve the interests of certain people? Indeed, even the Chinese, shockingly, are now claiming to have discovered America before Columbus. Discovered in 1492, we do not know what the truth is. How do you know what the truth is? Because somebody told you. Because of your thinking, opinion. One must kick back, relax, and enjoy white and black lies. As long as white folks tell lies and live lies, why shouldn't Africans tell lies? At any rate, what is the truth? Asterisk, okay? Enough. Let us move on. So how should we conclude? What can we make of this strange philosophy called Pan-Africanism? Not much. It is silly. I am responding to it because a Pan-Africanist still has a lot of attraction for some misguided black persons. Pan-Africanism. Philosophy needs to be counteracted before impressionable minds gravitate to it to their detriment. For one thing, all human beings came from Africa and justifiably can claim Africa as their home. All human beings are Africans and ought to be able to live in Africa if they so desire. The truth is that the entire world belongs to all human beings. Pan-Africanism, ice in adolescent philosophy, and has no basis in mature discourse.